Okay, welcome back to our part three of contracts. This is the last topic of our course, obligations and contracts. This is your host, your coach, and your instructor, attorney Lyndon Maceren. So this topic now, this video will discuss the different kinds of defective contracts. This is in Articles 1380 to 1422 of the Civil Code. So defective contracts are the following: recessible contracts, voidable, unenforceable, and void contracts. So we begin with recessible contracts. So recessible contracts are those which have caused a particular economic damage, either to one of the parties or to a third person, and which may be set aside even if valid. It may be set aside in whole or in part, and to the extent of the damage caused. So here, there is damage either to one of the parties, so either the buyer or the seller, or to a third person, maybe the creditor, and can be rescinded. No? So what are these defective contracts? So there are 6 kinds of defective contracts. So number 1 is when the contract is entered into by a guardian and the ward suffers damage or lesion, here lesion, by more than 1/4 of the value of the object or property. So in number 1, the owner of the property is the ward, the minor. No? Probably the minor has lost his parents, and there's a guardian who is now managing his property. So in order to sustain the ward's education or uh, shelter, food, clothing, the guardian sells the property of the ward. Now, if the ward suffers lesion or damage by more than 1/4 of the value of the object, then the contract can be rescinded. So it can be rescinded by the minor or the ward. We'll discuss that further in the next slide. The second recessible contract is when the agreement is entered into by a representative of an absentee. So a representation of absentees, meaning there's an absentee who is represented in the contract, and the absentee suffers lesion by more than 1/4 of the value of the property. So lesion is the damage or the gross inadequacy of the price. Now here in number 2, the absentee. What is an absentee? It's a person who uh, is absent or whose existence has been unknown. No? Let's say, for instance, Pedro went to Iraq for a vacation. Iraq, no? And for quite some time, he has not come back. So maybe 10 years he has been in Iraq, and there's no contact or there's no correspondence from him. So we assume that he is absent, or he can be assumed as he probably died in Iraq because there's a war, ongoing war there. No? So that is a case of a person who is considered as an absentee. Okay? So here, the absentee suffers lesion or damage of more than 1/4 of the value of the property. So upon his return, when he finds out that his property has been sold by a representative who he has not give authority, then he can file for a recession to claim for uh, the damage. Number three, when contracts are entered into to defraud creditors. No? So number three, there is a party enters into a contract in order not to pay his creditor. So we will discuss this further in the next slides. Fourth, when the object of litigation and the contract entered into by defendant is without knowledge or approval of the litigants or judicial authority. So the object of the contract here is the subject matter in a case or a litigation. So litigation is a pending case in court. So there is a case in court and the subject matter is this property. And property has been sold by the defendant. So defendant is the person who is being sued. No? Siyang gikiha. So the contract, does the defendant sold the property without the knowledge or approval of the plaintiffs or the court. No? So the plaintiff, it's either the plaintiff or the court, or both of them. No? So at least the plaintiff should be made aware of the sale in order that it be valid, or with the permission of the court who is handling the case. No? So without their approval, so the contract may be rescinded or canceled by the plaintiff. So plaintiff is the person or the party who is filing the case against the defendant. So number five, these are payments made by an insolvent person. So we have discussed already insolvent when a person is unable to pay his debts when they become due or demandable. No? But he has still assets, but not enough to pay all of the obligations. So in here, the obligations are not yet due, so they are not yet mature. But the insolvent person made the payment erroneously. So there's a mistake. No? So this is the same. Payments made in a state of insolvency. So when a person is already insolvent, he made a payment. So that payment can be rescinded, meaning it can be cancelled by the insolvent person. So when is a person declared insolvent? So a person cannot declare himself as insolvent. It must be declared by a competent court. No, if a person has already has no capacity to pay all his debts with his existing assets, then he can file for insolvency before a court of law. So if the court finds him to be insolvent, then all his obligations will be frozen. You know? So what is frozen? So meaning the creditors can no longer collect because the insolvent person is given by the court time to recover. You know? So the maximum number of years here is 3 years. So an insolvent person is given 3 years by a court of law to recover in order that he can pay his debts. And creditors are prevented from collecting from the insolvent person. So if that insolvent person made his payment, so that could be an erroneous payment. So it can be rescinded. Okay, so in number 1 and 2, there is damage or lesion. So what is lesion? Lesion is the gross inadequacy of the price or consideration which the owner of the property suffers as a result of the sale of the said property. So, example, the guardian sold ward's property. So the ward is the minor. And the value of the property is 1 million pesos. And the selling price is 700,000 pesos. So there is inadequacy of the price. And how much is that? Lesion is 300,000 pesos. According to the guardian, the proceeds of the sale was used to pay for the ward's high school and college tuition. Is that a valid sale? Yes, it's valid because it's used for the ward's education. But the ward is afforded by law to file a claim for the insufficiency. No? So the law affords the ward to file a claim against the buyer. So, Mr. Buyer, you have to pay me additional 300,000 pesos because what you paid, the 700,000 pesos, is inadequate. Why? Because the value of my property is 1 million. And if the buyer will not pay the insufficient amount, then the ward is given the remedy of recession. So the result of recession, if it is approved by the court, so you have to file it before a court. No? So if the court awards the ward a recession, so the effect there is the ward is going to give back the 700,000 pesos to the buyer, and the buyer will give the property back to the ward. So there is return or restoration of the things received. So here the ward has received 700,000 pesos, so he will return that to the buyer. And the buyer of the property shall return the property to the ward. No? That is the requisite of recession, or that is the effect of the recession. But it's subject to prescription. No? Again, what is prescription? It's the expiration to file the action. So if prescription sets in, then the remedy can no longer be availed of. No? We have a note here. So if the transaction, meaning if this transaction, the above transaction, is approved by a court, the remedy of recession is not available. Okay? So if there's approval from a court, then there is no recession. So again, prescription, which is the expiration to file the action, is 4 years for recession. So in case of ward, the prescription shall commence to run from the date the ward turns 18 years old, or the day he loses his legal capacity. So before, the legal capacity was 21 years old. Now it's 18. So it might change. So that's why there is an or here. So meaning if the ward turns 18 years old, then the prescription of 4 years will start counting. No? So let's say when the sale here in the example was made today, 2020, the year 2020, karon ni nabaligya ang yuta, and the ward is high school, so he is 14 years old. No? The ward is, let's say he's 14 years old. So he can file a claim of recession when he turns 18 years old. So since he is 14 years old now, so he has 4 years plus another 4 years until prescription sets in, no? Because prescription will start running when he turns 18. So 18 years, upon reaching 18 years plus 4 years, so 22. When he reached 22, the prescription will set in. So meaning he can no longer file recession. You know? So when will he turn 22? When he's 14 years old today, so that is 8 years from now. So in 2029, 2020 plus 8 is 2028. He has still until 2028 to file recession. So by 2029, he can no longer file. In the case of absentee, prescription shall start running from the time the absentee's domicile is known. So what is domicile? It is the place where a person originally came from. No? This is his parents or his grandparents or where his parents reside. This is normally when you go like fiesta, you go back to your hometown. That is your domicile. No? So he has 4 years to file the recession when his domicile is known. Now, the remedy of recession is only available if the plaintiff has no other means to obtain reparation. So meaning, it is not the first remedy. No? So the first remedy for the ward or the minor, since he suffered lesion, is to file collection from the buyer for the for the damage suffered. No? So in our case, he suffered 300,000, so he must demand first. And if ever the buyer is not willing to pay additional 300,000 pesos to the minor, then that is the time the recession is available. So this comes in, number one, plaintiff has no other means to obtain reparation. Reparation means payment for the damage. No? Number two, requisite, when the plaintiff must still able to return whatever he may be obliged to return. So as I've said, the result or the effect of recession, if granted by the court, the parties must return the things. So again, the ward should return the 700,000, which was received by his guardian, and the buyer will return the 1 million worth of property back to the ward. And number three, when the things or when the property is not yet passed to third parties or to a third person who did not act in bad faith. No? Let's say the buyer of the ward of the property has not yet transferred or sold the property to another third person. But if that buyer of that ward's property has already sold the ward's property to another person, and this person has not, is in good faith, meaning he does not know any defect of the contract, then the remedy of recession is no longer available. No? So if I will speak in Visayan, so the property of the ward, ang property sa ward, nabaligya na. Sa lain nga tawag sa buyer. So the buyer has already transferred or sold that property to another person. Therefore, recession can no longer be availed of. Number 4, it must be made within the prescribed period. So make sure that prescription has not set in. Okay? So if in this case, if the 4 can no longer be made or are not present, so recession is no longer available.